Helena Humphrey. Glad you could join us. Rescue operations are underway in Ukraine's port city of Mykolaiv after at least 10 Russian missiles struck 2 universities and another civil infrastructure. Well, local officials say that at least 4 people have been injured. Elsewhere, Russian airstrikes hit Kharkiv in the north and 3 districts in the Dnipro region to the east. Meanwhile, 18 people are still missing in the central Ukrainian city of Vinnytsia after missiles hit civilian buildings on Thursday. At least 23 people there are confirmed dead. Our correspondent Sasha Vakalina told us that Russian attacks on civilians is fueling Ukraine's desire to continue the fight.
I have to say that the attack on Vinnytsia yesterday was truly heartbreaking for Ukrainian society, for everybody all over Ukraine and beyond Ukrainian borders, of course. Seeing the pictures of the disturbing pictures of that stroller of the kids who died and who got injured, this is, of course, this had a very heartbreaking effect. And this brought the total of children killed during the war to 352 by now. 352 Ukrainian children who died since the full-scale invasion. So, of course, this has a huge impact on the morale of the Ukrainians. But I also have to say that when it comes to Ukrainian military and those who are fighting and defending for Ukraine, this made them very angry, so to say, because they do feel like they have to, no matter what fatigue or exhaustion that they had, of course, now since months of this full-scale war, they feel like they have to defend it even more for those children.
I mean, 352 children, that is a number which bears repeating, and I can see your emotion even saying it. But, you know, there's a pattern here. Schools hit, universities. Mm-hmm. Is this being seen as part of a strategy?
Well, that's the question here, because I've checked now on the numbers, and according to Ukrainian authorities, they will have to rebuild and recover 400 schools and 300 kindergartens. This is, of course, including 152 cultural sites that, according to UNESCO, also religious buildings, historical buildings. This is exactly why that concern is being raised here. But we have to understand also that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, repeatedly said that he does not recognize the existence of Ukraine as a sovereign state. So this is indeed can be seen as an attack on the very essence of Ukrainian culture and heritage and language as well, because in the occupied territories nowadays, all the teachers reportedly, those who stayed there on the occupied territories, they are being forced to change the way they teach at schools, and they have to switch to Russian language, and also they have to switch the whole curriculum into the Russian curriculum program. So all in all, these can be seen as the attack on more than just territory, but also Ukrainian culture and essence of it.
Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry said negotiators were close to reaching a deal to unblock grain from Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Delegates from Moscow, Kyiv and Ankara met with UN officials in Istanbul this week to discuss the possible resumption of exports. Moscow had previously said that Western sanctions must be relaxed before foreign vessels could resume operations. But Turkey's foreign minister said that a deal was set to be signed next week. We spoke to our correspondent Galina Polinskaya to ask how developments in the grain negotiations were being received in Moscow.
Russia says that Moscow's proposal on how to resume Ukraine grain exports were largely supported by negotiations at talks, and that the agreement could be seen very soon. But many analysts think actually that we could see some results as early as the next Tuesday, on the 19th of July, when President Putin will meet the President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in Iran. They are there to talk about Syria officially, but of course it could be expected that they could also discuss the grains. And some analysts believe that Vladimir Putin wants to announce this decision by himself, and surely the next week there will be another round of negotiations. And RIA Novosti, the Russian state agency, says that some diplomatic sources are persuaded that the agreement is very, very close, and some other sources say that what Russia discusses at those talks are sanctions which are not directly linked with the grain problem.
The UK has issued a national emergency after issuing its first ever red warning for extreme heat, with temperatures there expected to reach up to 40 degrees Celsius for the first time since records began. Well, in France, 10,000 people have been evacuated from the Gironde region as firefighters battle blazes in the Landes de Gascogne National Park. Meanwhile, in neighbouring Spain, a red alert has also been issued, with temperatures hitting 45.6 Celsius in Andalusia and Seville reaching 44 Celsius earlier this week. Our science correspondent Jeremy Wilkes says that young and old are vulnerable to heat, and so everybody should be taking precautionary measures.
Now, it does depend on who you are and where you grew up, actually, and that's been proven scientifically. So somebody who grew up in Athens will be better able to deal with this kind of heat than somebody who grew up in Dublin, for example, and that's normal. But yeah, I mean, whoever you are, so, we often hear warnings for the elderly and people with young children, that still applies, but everybody needs to stay hydrated, stay out of the sun. As you said, the UK Met Office offering it forward this advice, saying this is not the moment to go and play in the sun. Don't go and splash around in the sea. Stay in the shade as much as you can. Treat it as you would a kind of storm. If there's a big storm coming in, then everybody knows they need to stay indoors, they need to take precautions. And that applies to things like travel as well, is what they're saying for this weekend and early next week as well. If you don't need to make that journey, then do you really want to go and get on a crowded train and get so hot? Maybe you can work from home, find some other way of doing things. And as I say, even for people in their 20s or 30s, when it's getting this hot, when you're getting up towards 40 degrees, it is dangerous for the body. And we've got overnight lows forecast in London of 25. So that means that's the coolest it's going to get. So, if you can, open up your windows at night, try and get some cool air in the house, and then during the daytime, behave as if you're in southern Europe and close blinds, close windows, and just try and keep the cool in.
I think that's really important advice, to also treat this as a severe weather event as you would anything else. Now, I read on Twitter, as one does, someone saying, you think this is hot, well, this is the coolest summer you're ever going to have for the rest of your life. I mean, I was pretty depressed by that, but it's probably true, isn't it?
I don't think we can say that that's definitely going to be the case, but let's say this is a sign of things to come, and there's no sign that it's going to get cooler. So when we talk about records being broken, 47 degrees in Portugal as well yesterday. That's possibly a new outright record for Portugal. In the UK, getting up to 40 degrees, possibly breaking the 38.7 degrees, which was the current all-time high in the UK. The best science that we have, which is from the IPCC, is that we should expect heat waves like this to be more frequent, more intense, and to last longer as we move forwards. And bear in mind that the climate that we have now is the result of emissions that we put into the atmosphere 20 or 30 years ago. So even if we drastically reduce emissions now, we're still going to carry on warming our planet. Maybe you'll get towards the end of the century, and if we've hit all of our objectives, then you'll start to see a kind of levelling off in that curve. But this warming is going to carry on, and so we need to prepare. We need to prepare in terms of how we organise our lives. I mean, in the UK, that's particularly the case because we're not used to it. But, how are we managing electricity demand? Do we send children to school when it's as warm as this or not? What kinds of measures can we take in the office, in the workplace, in order to change rules and allow people to adapt? Because we're going to have to adapt. If it's 40 degrees in London, we need to take this seriously.
The 5 remaining candidates to replace Boris Johnson as UK Prime Minister faced off for the first time in a TV debate. Leading the race is former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, followed closely by rising challenger Penny Mordaunt. The candidates were grilled on their past support for Boris Johnson and their leadership credentials. Mordaunt accused the other camps of trying to thwart her campaign using black ops tactics. Peter Cardwell is the political editor of Talk Radio and former UK government advisor, and he's been watching that debate closely, seeing perhaps a few of the faces he's no doubt come across during his time working with the UK government. Good to see you again, Peter. We're talking about a dual challenge, essentially, for these candidates. It's about policy. It's also about performance. Who came out as convincing in your book?
I think Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, did very well. I think that Penny Mordaunt, his main challenger, played it too safe. She came across as bitter and annoyed at times. And I think that Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, did not do well at all. There are two challengers that aren't going to make it through to the final two, almost certainly. Tom Tugendhat, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee chairman, and a woman called Kemi Badenoch, who's another government minister. They both had some good answers, good speeches at the end, for example. But really, I think Rishi Sunak won this debate, and that appears to be the consensus from political people I'm speaking to this evening.
Peter, there was an almost awkward moment when the moderator asked, is Boris Johnson an honest man? And most candidates basically said, to varying degrees, no. And Tom Tugendhat, as you said, just point blank said no. But is this a credibility issue, though, for the Tories going forward, if many of them stuck around for a long time while apparently believing this?
Yes, I think that's a point that is going to come up, but I do think the final two who get into this, and it's important because at the moment only the members of Parliament in the UK are voting to get those candidates down to the final two. My strong belief is that the final two will both have been ministers in Boris Johnson's government, and it will be very difficult for them to disassociate themselves with the Prime Minister they have served. Although Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor, he resigned because of integrity issues in regard to Boris Johnson, and that's something that could play to be a strength for him.
You know, Peter, you've advised ministers, prime ministers, you know the pressures from behind the scenes. Who do you think who's got what it takes?
I think Rishi Sunak has got what it takes. He has been the Chancellor. He's made some very, very tough decisions. We have a real inflation problem here. And he was very open, actually, about saying that rising taxes, national insurance to pay for the NHS, for example, was something he had to do. The tax policies of Penny Mordaunt and Liz Truss, his two challengers, have not really been costed. And a lot of the audience were kind of challenging them, saying, yes, you're promising us tax cuts, but actually, where is the money going to come from to pay for our public services? So it's going to be a tight race. It's going to be a fantastically interesting race. But I do think my instinct is that eventually this was a good night for Rishi Sunak. He's been on the back foot a little bit. Penny Mordaunt, for example, we've had Penny Mania in the last few days. But I think now it's the race is Rishi Sunak's to lose.
Briefly, if you don't mind, Peter, I mean, I know it's a TV debate, but ultimately Conservative Party members will have the final say. So I just wonder, do you think TV debates actually have much sway, or have they already made up their minds?
I think that many members will have made up their minds. People who join political parties are usually quite decisive people, but there's only about 150,000 of them, and that's the only people who are going to really decide who the next Prime Minister is, and many people wouldn't have a chance even to vote for candidates they want. It'll just be down to the final two. So we'll see what happens in a few weeks' time.
Political editor of Talk Radio, Peter Cardwell, and former UK government minister, advisor to the government. Peter, thank you so much.